Hello, everybody, and welcome to Planet FPL, the world where everything revolves around Fantasy Premier League again this weekend because football is back, James. Well, Premier
It's
League
not gone
football is
away.
back. English Super League football is back.
Yeah.
Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. People's poll on a Monday this week because obviously we didn't have any games to review from the weekend. We don't do an FA Cup review show, do we, James? But the full podcast is coming out on Thursday this week for everybody with a final rundown, maybe on a little bit more chip strategy once the Caribou Cup semis are finished and out of the way.
And tonight's FA Cup draw is very important as well.
Yes, of course. Don't even know if my team's in it yet, but we'll know by 10 o'clock or
You're
whatever.
definitely in it,
We
mate.
might not know.
No.
Is the draw before the game?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Yes,
you might
get
not,
in there.
You might not play in the next round, but you'll be in the draw, mate.
Yeah. But today, so instead of the main podcast, we're doing a people's poll, James. Options out to the people. They chose what were the runners and riders. Quite a close poll this week, I would say.
Yes, it was. I was on my way back from Preston, for those who follow me on Twitter, and my brain couldn't be bothered to think of subjects. So I asked the people, and most of the responses were stuff that we'd already done, but I'm very, very grateful for it. But the three topics that we went for, and you're right, it was quite a close vote, were multi-club ownership. What's the actual benefits of clubs like Man City having all these clubs under their City Group banner, clubs like Bournemouth setting up partnerships with clubs like Lorient in France? I went to look at multi-club ownership, and I think we will come back to that. That didn't win the vote. Neither did player power, which I think has become kind of hot topic, particularly over the weekend, especially in reference to Moises Caicedo's decision to openly come out and say, I want to go and play for Arsenal by the looks of it. Maybe it'll even be Chelsea, but his big bids have obviously gone in for him.
I was a bit taken aback by the transfer fee suggested with Caicedo. I mean, 70 million rejected this morning.
Brighton supposedly won 100.
So you paid how much for Bissouma?
Yeah, but Bissouma was like last year a contract. And
yeah,
stuff.
I get that, but how much did you pay? 25 or 30 or something?
Yeah, 25 to 30, I think.
So then, and Caicedo was bought as Bissouma's replacement. So within the space of like 7-8 months from defensive midfielders, they've made so much money.
Caicedo was with him last year. I just think he didn't really come to prominence till probably he scored against Manchester United towards the end of the season. It was only when people started to truly notice.
But two defensive midfielders, they're talking like 120 million between the two of them. Say he goes for 90 or something like that.
And eventually they'll probably sell Alexis McAllister at some stage, and that'll be worth a fortune for him as well, wouldn't they? And you know what? They'll spend the money properly as well. I think they bought Caicedo for about 4 million, right? They bought Matoma for like 2.5 million. They're a very intelligent football club.
Ridiculous.
They'll find new replacements if Caicedo ends up going. You say 70 million, maybe a lot, but in reference to player power as well. Obviously, Anthony Gordon's now officially joined Newcastle. He didn't rock up for training for 3 days last week. So I think it's hot topic. There'll be something else over the next 36 hours or so. Story this morning looked like done deal for Tottenham with Pedro Porro from Sporting Lisbon. They've turned around this morning when he's about to fly over to London for his medical and gone, actually, no, we want some more money. And he's obviously raging about it. That's a situation where perhaps the player's stuck in doesn't know whether he's coming or going, and the club's showing some power. So
yeah, it is interesting. I mean, we've definitely come back to that as well, because it kind of negates the value of the extra long contracts that the likes of Chelsea are offering to tie people in, although that was to get around a bit of FFP with amortization, which as soon as we finished recording about Chelsea, that was more page, and they introduced a 5-year limit. So a lot of interesting power shifts and power struggles, let's say, happening between clubs and players. And of course, agents.
The subject today for discussion that you voted for, however, is the Premier League. And is it too powerful versus other leagues? And I guess specifically the other major big five leagues, if you will, France, Italy, Germany, Spain. Is the Premier League too powerful, Suj? Is this... I've often thrown away the comment that we're already playing in the Super League. We don't need one. Is the Premier League too powerful?
We don't consistently win European trophies.
No, true.
In the same way that the other clubs do. So it depends whether we're talking about financially powerful or on the pitch. At the end of the day, I still think we lose out to the Spanish clubs quite regularly, even PSG, Bayern Munich. I think there is only a handful of clubs across all of the other leagues that can compete. But if you wanted to judge powerful in terms of on pitch, there's an argument to say, well, we don't consistently win the big European trophies. We do win them, but not as consistently as maybe the Spanish do. But from a financial point of view, there's no doubt that we have the richest, strongest, most powerful league. What's the end goal here is my ultimate question is what do we want? Do we want to create a more competitive football landscape, or do we want the market to dictate what happens?
Probably more the market dictates. I mean, to just reference your point about competitiveness on the pitch, I know AC Milan had a very bad result against Sassuolo at the weekend in Serie A, but Milan played Tottenham in the Champions League last 16. And it's probably a 50-50 call in terms of who goes through. If you look at the betting odds, it's generally around about 50-50, yet Tottenham's revenue in 21-22 was double that of Milan, which we referenced on the Juventus podcast last week. So that's the disparity, isn't it? You're right. It's not necessarily an on-pitch disparity yet, but is it perhaps, Suj, that really we don't dominate, say, in the Champions League, i.e. an English club doesn't always win it. Manchester City still haven't won it, for example, because there are a couple of superpowers. Specifically, PSG have also not won it yet themselves either, but Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, Barcelona. You go into most seasons now and you think an English club will win it all, or one of those four other clubs will win
simple.
it, don't you?
That's it. Yeah.
Now, this year, ironically...
there's the odd chance a Juventus or something like that might get to a final because it is a knockout competition, but again, it's two-leg knockout competition. Which
ironically, this year, there might be a Napoli or even a smaller chance of a Benfica to go all the way in that competition, because actually on pitch, I don't think that any of the clubs that are in the Champions League of the so-called favourites are in the best shape right now, for example. Perhaps if Arsenal and Barcelona are in the competition, perhaps that would look a bit different, but they're not at the moment, right? They're both in the Europa League. So on pitch, perhaps, still competitive. But if the financial trends continue, maybe that will change. Maybe that will change, Suj.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is we talked about this when we did a Patreon podcast last week about Chinese football and the rise and fall of the Chinese Super League. And one of the reasons why the Super League was so popular, or the government wanted to push the Chinese Super League, was the development of the national team, i.e. Chinese footballers. Look at the national teams for France, Spain, Germany, and Italy. You'd say all four were ahead of England.
No, I wouldn't.
No?
Not
Italy
now,
not?
no. Italy haven't won a World Cup knockout game
true.
since 2000, since they won it in
They're
2006.
also European champions, mind.
Yeah.
France obviously getting to a World Cup final.
Yeah.
And a large part of that, and whether or not, if you take a step back over a slightly longer period of time, maybe 10 years, a large part of that, Germany have been a bit flaky. But
if you go back 10 years ago, 100% agree with that comment.
The percentage of players playing in the league that were homegrown is got to be higher in those countries. And we were the first to really push for foreign players coming in once the limits were lifted. Part of that is that makes the league a more attractive proposition for television because you have more superstars playing in it and that kind of thing. But also we then bemoan the lack of young English talent coming through. So when we come back to this question, like, which is it too strong or is it too powerful? It really depends where you're looking at it. But from a financial point of view, it really is a juggernaut. The TV deals that we're doing are far in excess. The ticket prices that the clubs are achieving are far in excess. The transfer fees and the salaries that we are paying are far in excess, bar obviously the other big four. So yeah, it does become particularly difficult for the others to compete.
I mean, to use another example, sorry, I'm going to bring Milan up again, but Milan are interested in buying Nicola Zanillo from Roma, and have been outbid by Bournemouth. And Milan said they couldn't compete with Bournemouth financially. Now, the player actually, René Jean meeting Bournemouth Bournemouth flew out to go and sign him, and the player just like, I don't want to go there, right? But he doesn't want a Premier League relegation scrap. But again, it goes back to the financials, doesn't it? In terms of
Does he not know about Andy Martin down at the arcades?
well,
In
if he
Bournemouth?
did,
He's going to
then
sort him right out. The
he'd
2p machines and all that.
he'd probably sign up. Yeah, the 2p machines down at
Yeah.
Bournemouth Pier is going to sort him out.
Bournemouth
Yeah,
need to sign Andy Martin to their sales team to get players in.
Bournemouth don't need to sign Andy Martin. You can hear Andy Martin on tomorrow's Clash of Correspondents with Gary Robinson, by the way, as well.
What a segue.
Yes, very, very nice. Do you think one of the questions I regularly get is, do you think football will ever, and I guess this is specific to the Premier League, do you think it'll ever bounce back at itself in the sense that the TV deals won't continue, for example, or fans will stop going on match days? Do you think it will ever hit that point where it pushes back, where just to example it, and it's different, but it happened here. Well, obviously the hooliganism nature and sort of off-field stuff in UK politics meant that attendances really declined in the later 70s to a real low in the 80s, then began to pick up again from Italia 90, all-seater stadiums, the introduction of the Premier League. Could you see anything that suddenly overseas broadcasters and stuff start going, actually, we've been paying too much for this? Where does it stop?
No, I don't see it for a couple of reasons. Firstly, if you look at the wider economy, society in general, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, right? That's a general trend across most of the developing world. How much are tickets to go to the theatre or the opera or to shows or concerts? Most are in excess of Premier League tickets. So I think the tickets still have room to go, but what you will do is price out your traditional match-going fans, and it becomes a more elitist experience where you've got to have more money to go to it, and that's definitely obviously not a good thing, because you want to make football accessible to as many people. But that's what will happen. Like the demographic of the people that go to the games, in my opinion, will change. People that can afford it will go, and that might not be the same people.
What you're saying is Roy Keane and prawn sandwiches is what you're saying, isn't it?
Yeah, that's inevitably going to happen. You'll get more tourist fans that will come through to pass through for a game. There are instances where people will pay 150 quid for a game or 200 quid for a game or that kind of thing. There are people that can afford to do it. They might not then do it regularly. So I still think there's headroom in ticket prices, but I think it means a change in the type of people that go to the games per se. And in terms of the television rights and the foreign television rights, right now, let's just say, for argument's sake, actually, I have the stats in front of me because you were so kind to share them. So combined annual broadcasting for the Premier League.
I think the statistics from 2021, just to clarify.
So let's just say, for argument's sake, the Premier League made 3.6 billion from overseas rights, and La Liga made 2 billion. If there's that's 5.6 billion. And if the Premier League are asking for more money, I don't think people are going to say, no, we're going to not give you more money. I think they'll take it away from other stuff. So they'll say, sorry, La Liga, we've got less money for your rights. We're going to give more money to the Premier League. There will come a point where that will obviously balance itself out and stop. But I think they'll take away from, they're like, Serie A. No, thank you. I'd rather give a little bit more money to the Premier League because that's the more in-demand product. The market will decide.
But in terms of the big two in Spain, as an example, Madrid and Barcelona, they may eventually completely break away from it and just do their own deals overseas. We know that those two clubs, essentially value-wise, is bigger than every other team in La Liga combined, and that even includes the likes of like Atletico Madrid and Valencia and Seville and the like, right? So if that happened, if it was just a Barcelona, Real Madrid, that would maybe change. I don't know. And obviously, in this country, the independent sales of own TV rights is something that I'm sure the Big Six / Big Seven, once Newcastle are in there, would like to do. But hopefully it will keep getting blocked, essentially, because all that's going to do is just add to the disparity of the spending even within the Premier League even more. Just to touch on your theatre comment, you know what I'm going to say about that, don't you? You go to the theatre and you're generally promised a happy ending. You might think it's shit, but you're promised a happy ending. You go and pay £100 for a ticket in the Premier League, you might get beat 5-0.
I mean, you're paying whatever you're paying for Spurs, and you're only getting the second half. You're getting after the interval performance as well, aren't you? At the moment,
Oh, true.
You don't even know. You don't even know what the story is for the first.
I pay one of the most expensive season tickets in the Premier League, and my team only decides to play one half of most matches. Sometimes recently, it's decided not to play either half of matches.
It is, but the reason for going is you're going to support your club, whereas there are plenty of people, and you have it at your place now with the new stadium, and we definitely have it at our place, the day trippers and the tourists. Like when I was walking to the game against Everton, a man there, he's clearly on holiday with his young son. He's like, "Can you take a picture for us with at the stadium?" I was like, "Sure, mate, give me your phone." His son was like 6 in full Barcelona kit. Or like it wasn't his Barcelona jumper and Barcelona this and Barcelona that. I'm like, where's the relevance for West Ham Everton right now? But look, the guy is 6-7 years old, right? He's coming to watch a game of football at the London Stadium. You're going to get a lot more of that. But
I don't
if the ticket prices continue to go up.
Not necessarily just at the bigger clubs. I've met people in the past, like in London and stuff, and have said, "What's my best chance of getting to a game this weekend?" And it might be in years gone past, I've gone, oh, Fulham or Charlton when they're in the Premier League, or it'll be harder at, say, a Tottenham, Arsenal, West Ham, Chelsea. But in any case, the club's perspective on it is very much what I've told you before, is if you don't pay the ticket, someone else will.
Correct.
And that's why there's no point moaning about the ticket prices at, say, Tottenham, which is obviously my club, or using as an example, and going, oh, the ticket prices are too high, when the stadium's sold out every week. Don't really care who's getting filled with it. It's someone putting their bum on a seat. Yeah.
Exactly that.
It's justifiable, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's still going to keep going in a certain direction. It's obviously clearly highlighted at the moment because of the amount of money that Chelsea have spent on players, and then the internal transfers as well.
I think isn't Chelsea more? It's
the other
more
5
than
combined or something.
I don't know if it's all of them combined, but it's not far off now, is it?
No, and they might not be done once they hijack the Casado deal from Arsenal, because we all think it might happen.
Well, it sounds like they're going back for Enzo Fernandez.
Yeah,
and that's probably going to be over 100.
Said, didn't he? So crazy money floating around. But then what's the solution, James? Like when it comes back down to
that's it as well. Do we care? Do we, and obviously we're here, so we're biased, right? It's right in front of our face. Do we care that the Premier League, even including those in the bottom half of the league and stuff, do we care that the power of them, that a Bournemouth can outbid a Milan? Do we care? Does it matter to us? Would we be bothered if Monza suddenly are outbidding Aston Villa, for example? Would we be bothered?
We might be if it was in reverse. I think we might be if it was in reverse.
We did the podcast you already mentioned on Patreon last week about the kind of the rise and the fall of the Chinese Super League. We were a bit concerned then, I think, that all the best players might suddenly start going to China.
The only evidence I have is the other way around. So we, in research for this podcast, I did a little bit of a Google search and a YouTube search, and just kind of see what information is out there about the Premier League taking over as the English Super League type situation. The majority of the content, James, was Italian or Spanish podcasts or YouTube channels talking about the English Premier League. So they're clearly, and there is a bit of English content as well, don't get me wrong, but it's clearly on their minds because there was more content from those countries than there was from the UK. So flip it in reverse, I reckon we would definitely be talking about it. When Barcelona make crazy transfer deals, we talk about it. When they offer Ousmane Dembele ridiculous amounts of money, or when that happens, and we're like, that's ridiculous, why can they get away with doing that? So I think we would care if it was in reverse the other way. I think we're probably outside our mind when it's happening, that we're in control and we have the power and we have the money and we're the ones buying up all of the players.
It's also Barcelona. If Real Sociedad start acting that way, do we look at it? Do people care?
We probably don't look at those transfers in as much detail, but they just don't make those kind of transfers as much, do they?
Well, no. I mean, if you actually look at the spending in 2022, across the big five leagues. It didn't actually hit its kind of peak point of 2019 when it's 6.69 billion was spent. It was 6.19 billion in 2022. What's really interesting though is that in 2019, the percentage of that spend by Premier League clubs across the big five leagues was 28.1% in 2019. In 2022, 48.5%. 48.5% of the spending in the big five leagues was by Premier League clubs in 2022.
Yeah, slightly biased by Chelsea's current splurge post new ownership. I can understand that. But it's not going to be much different. It'll always be in and around that 40-45% mark.
But it's not
forward.
just Chelsea, right? So I think Chelsea's, this was from the Football Observatory, and this is just spending. This isn't incoming. Chelsea spent in 2022 333 million euros. You got United 268, Newcastle 259, West Ham 5th 220, Nottingham Forest 6th 216. You've got, of the top 10, the non-English clubs you've got in there are Barcelona, Paris Saint-Germain, Juventus. That's it. The three obviously massive clubs. Juventus are now potentially in financial trouble. And if you look down to 11th and 20th throughout the year, you've got Bayern Munich in there, Napoli, Dortmund, and Atalanta. The rest is made up. You've got the likes of Everton still in there, Wolves, Leeds, Aston Villa in there in the top 20.
Yeah.
So it's not just Chelsea inflating it, mate. That's 13 of the top 20 were Premier League clubs.
The point of financial fair play, though, is to try and regulate this and make it a slightly more even playing field. Whether or not that plays out is to be seen. Tying in salaries and agents' fees and transfer fees to the revenue of a club means that people have to live within their means, but it doesn't address the situation where we're earning more, therefore we can spend more. In fact, it probably makes it more difficult for the European clubs than it does. It's actually probably making their difficulties worse, if you know what I mean, rather than putting any sort of restrictions on the Premier League.
That spending, just to go back to 2019, I think particularly for La Liga had a 23.2% share of the spending in 2019. 2020 has gone down to 11.6%. They're the ones, if you think back to Super League and stuff, and the big push, Madrid and Barcelona, plus Juventus, who are now hitting several difficulties that we discussed 2 weeks ago. They're the ones who've made the biggest noise, isn't it? I don't think Paris Saint-Germain are that bothered about the Premier League spending, are they?
Well, they've got the money from kind of being government backed, haven't they? Or nation backed, should you say?
Their bottomless pit, if you will.
Yeah, it's particularly difficult. How would you feel about more restrictive rules around the leveling up of the playing field financially? Because that's the only way you're going to do it, is more restrictions and more regulations.
Yeah.
Take away the market. Right? Spurs spent good money last summer.
Yep.
People thought that you would then comfortably potentially be the ones to challenge the top two based on that.
Stop digging me out.
No, but the thing is, it didn't happen. And therefore, it's another example of spending money doesn't equal success on the pitch. No matter what people think. It obviously helps. There's no doubt about it. But it doesn't equal success on the pitch. So what difference does it make when people spend big? There's no guarantee of success that way.
No,
we spent shitloads. We're in a relegation battle.
It's the same. I mean,
we're worse, in fact.
We've had a lot of discussion on this podcast about big five leagues, but just below that, you've got the Eredivisie, you've got the Portuguese league, you've got giants in there like Benfica and Ajax. I mean, interestingly, that of the clubs that benefited from transfer spending over the last 10 years, by the way, the Championship, this is outside the big five leagues. The Championship was basically essentially the seventh, so the second biggest outside the big five leagues in terms of income or transfer fees. And the Portuguese league was first, and the Dutch league was third. But yeah, there's that. To be honest, in terms of the financial things, we've discussed this before. Like, to be honest, I've not looked at the numbers recently, but there was a big boast that was going on for a while, wasn't it? That the Championship was the fourth most watched league in Europe.
Europe, yeah.
In terms of match day attendances and stuff. And that's obviously helped at certain points when you've got clubs like Leeds and Villa both in there at the same time, and Newcastle as well. So it might have dipped a little bit more recently. But yeah, I mean, the only thing with that is they're all in bloody debt in the Championship, aren't they? The majority of them. Although most big football clubs are obviously in debt as well. But when you're saying that and you're equating, like, where does it stop? Do you want, like, I don't know, like, do you want to put a block on a certain amount of spending, say within the big five? What about Portugal, Holland? And then below Portugal, Holland, then you've got like your Belgiums and your Austrias. And I mean, in Austria, you've got a very well-backed team in, say, Red Bull Salzburg, for example. And actually there's investment, the guys who own PSG, the Qatari investment fund, they've recently bought a stake into Braga in Portugal over the last few months. That might be a story we need to follow. But where does it stop? Where does it trickle down to?
So
okay, the spending in some of the smaller Eastern European countries, etc.
This does come back around a little bit full circle to something that was an option within the conversation, James, which is player power. Because one of the things we talked about when we spoke about Chelsea is that ultimately a squad can be 25 players. That's it, right? You can't have more than 25 players in your Premier League squad or Europe squad or whatever you submit to UEFA or the Premier League. So where's the benefit to teams having more than 25 players, 30 players, 35 players? There isn't. So if you're a football player, would you rather come to the Premier League and pick up a paycheck for sitting on the bench and training week in, week out, or would you rather go and play? Now, if they start, if the shift is towards I want to play football, which it is, then there's just there's a limit to how many players you can hoard and how many transfers you can make.
But if you take Chelsea have bought a number of players who they don't need to register at the moment because they're under 21 and stuff, right?
Right. Okay. So
I mean, their squad is more than 25.
And that's a riskier transfer strategy.
Well, obviously, once those players will go above, if they haven't sold players, then players will have to be sold. But there'll probably be players that they no longer want.
Yeah, it's true. It's a very difficult one, and I'm not convinced that evening out the playing field through regulation is the right way to go.
But
it's a market.
How do you like the FFP stuff that's changing in terms of certain percentage of wages versus turnover? If you did it on the turnover in the Premier League, it's only going to make it stronger. How would
you feel if they split the TV revenue opposite? How would you feel if they split the TV revenue opposite? So the team at the bottom gets the most and the team at the top gets the least.
I just think that it's not going to happen, is it?
No. So this is what I'm talking about by legislation or regulation, like changing the rules in that way. You know how in the draft system works in America, and I can't profess to know it particularly well, but the team at the bottom of the league get the first pick in the draft and whatever else to try and even it out on the pitch.
I get that.
Something along the lines that the weaker teams get more and the better teams get less to try and even it out on the pitch.
But they do. So you could say, right, what's the difference between us and, say, comparing to NFL? Promotion and relegation. So those who get relegated from the Premier League get the parachute payments and stuff, right?
Yeah, that's true. So but if you finish 17th, you don't.
I mean, they still get, in terms of TV money and stuff, they still get a monstrous amounts for finishing. Actually, the Premier League have a decent kind of leverage in terms of, Manchester United aren't making 200 million more than Brentford, for example, right? And to be fair, would a club like Brentford deserve to make more in TV revenue than Manchester United? Okay, you can say leveling the playing field, but actually, no, that's wrong, isn't it? Yeah, Brentford aren't going to be on the TV more than Man United. A lot of that TV money that comes in is because of Manchester United rather than a Brentford. Sorry to use them as an example that entered my brain.
Yeah.
So
it's a fair point.
No, it's to say go back to La Liga, right? I mean, they've got Barca and Real Madrid have obviously got more say in terms of what's happening now. But again, take them two out the league. What if those two did leave? The overseas broadcasters generally give about paying for the other 18 teams in the Liga. And that's not just a league of that size. Imagine Scotland. Take Rangers and Celtic out.
Correct. If that was to happen, I'm very sure that the Spanish FA or the Scottish FA would put something in there that Rangers and Celtic had to give a certain percentage of their money to the rest of the teams, like 20% of what their deal was. They said, fine, you go and negotiate your own deal, but 20% has to be given back to us.
Why? If
Or
they left and
something along
broke
those
away.
lines. Yeah, but then you're making the league completely uncompetitive. It's pointless exercise then at that point.
But
Would
then
you want to watch Rangers? Would you want to watch Rangers and Celtics smash everyone every week?
But look at our league. Did so many people, a lot of people who support, say, let's put Newcastle in there now and say don't support any of them 7 clubs, will think that everything's completely weighted in their advantage anyway, to VAR decisions, to the financial stuff they get on top from European competition, etc. Is obviously, I mean, could you do that? Could you look at money made from European competitions and say spread that? But again, would a Brentford deserve to earn money from Champions League revenue that Manchester United made playing in it? And I know they're not in it this year, but you understand what I'm saying? No. It's that those clubs are in it are obviously going to make it, aren't they? But the disparity is massive.
Yeah,
if you look at a club
big.
like Leeds, who's recently joined the Premier League and are trying to do bits in the transfer market, etc., it just looks a long way away, doesn't it? And it's not to say that a Leeds or a Villa, etc., can't get back in there, but even within our league, there's the disparity. That's clear. We've called it a big 6 for how long now?
Yep.
10 years.
Yeah.
We're going to start renaming it a big 7 unless a Tottenham or a Chelsea like massively fall away, right?
Yeah,
so even within our Super League. But yeah, we've had this discussion before. Like, if you started a genuine Super League, the idea that there's only going to be 6 Premier League clubs. If you did it on revenue, you're having about 15 out of 20 currently. Again, we touched on that on the Juventus podcast last week.
Yeah, let's see how it unfolds, James. I mean, it's a funny one. We're having a discussion about it but I don't see that we can come to a conclusion that has a solution or anything along those lines. But the landscape will change in terms of clubs wanting their own rights, and maybe there will be a ceiling on transfer fees, ticket prices, that kind of thing. Maybe FFP. The new version of FFP with UEFA, which is a percentage of your turnover is what you can spend on transfers, salaries, and agents' fees, might be the rule and regulation on FFP that works, because they've tried all sorts of different things. We don't know. I mean, that might be the thing that takes the steam out of the market.
You mentioned ticket prices. That's interesting, because if you go and look at current or let's say last season, comparing average attendances in the big 5 leagues, you shouldn't really do that, because certain nations had more of a sporadic return from COVID and stuff like that. So you probably need to go back, really, to be totally accurate, to go back to 2018-19, which is the year completely before COVID. Average attendance in the Bundesliga, 43,000, Premier League, 38,000, La Liga, 27, Serie A, 25, Ligue 1, 22. So Bundesliga, most for the attendances. But you go and have a look tomorrow and see how much you have to pay for a ticket to go and watch Borussia Dortmund or Bayern Munich versus going and watching even a mid-table team in the Premier League.
It's cheap. Half or a third of the cost.
And that's great, by the way. There's obviously zero criticism of Germany for very good ticket pricing. But would it, if they've got a real kind of tight-knit fan culture over there in Germany, if suddenly they did start pricing it up like the Premier League, their attendances will drop.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it.
They're not dropping here. They're not dropping here. So you can say, oh, it's comparative in terms of foots through the door, but in terms of the money generated from people entering those stadiums, wildly different. And that's not, when we did a podcast on Milan last summer on Patreon, we said the only way really going to change things is Serie A, you got to start building stadiums. Got to get up to speed. It's like a lot of them have been left derelict and stuff. Got to build new stadiums. Juventus are the only ones who've done it. I'm going to the San Siro in a couple of weeks, which like I can't wait to go to. It's so iconic and stuff. But they've got to get out of there, really. Yeah. Because I know it was in a state when I went there back in 2010. And I don't suppose it's any different now in 2023. It's probably going to look even now. I'll go to Tottenham every week, and I'm a bit of a snob about it. Yeah, he's probably going to look even worse. It reminded me of just right laugh at Preston at the weekend. How tight it was in the gangways. It was some Tottenham fans didn't know. It was all just saying we've become such snobs because of what we used to at White Hart Lane. There's nothing to stop this disparity. The way it's going is only going to grow. So looking at that now, where it's like 48% of the spend is Premier League versus the other big five, I think if we sit here and have the same conversation in 4 or 5 years, unless Barca, Madrid, Bayern, and PSG can truly keep up, then it's only going to get bigger. It's going to get up to 60% of stuff, surely.
We shall see how it rolls out, James. Do you want to tell the listeners what we have left for this week's content as we build up to game week 23?
So
22?
Which we now know after the results at the weekend. I was sitting in a burger place with my dad in Preston on Saturday night. I had a look at the United score at halftime, 0-0. People panicking. Double game week's going to be off. Fucking hell, mate. Calm down. So, yes, Clash of Correspondents tomorrow. Manchester United versus Leeds, ahead of both clubs' doubles with Gary Robinson and Andy Martin. That'll be out for you tomorrow. Wednesday, Sky Fantasy Football Podcast. The much-promised Chip Strategy follow-up podcast with all the information from the cup results, all the information on completed transfers, etc., which we won't talk about too much, but we'll have every little bit of info that we can possibly have, hopefully, when we sit down on Thursday to talk through all the chip stuff. We'll look at, in terms of navigating chips, strategy ideas, differential ways of doing it, template ways of doing it. That's all to come on Thursday. I'll stream early on Friday as well if people got follow-up questions after that as well, because obviously it's a Friday deadline as well. So deadline streams 5:30, I want to say, on YouTube on Friday. Our Patreon podcast this week, Q&A today. We are going to do the investigation into the ownership of Stoke City tomorrow on Money in Football. Yep. Tottenham on Wednesday. We'll talk about some interesting travels I had in Preston, including a very, very failed selfie with a football celebrity that I'll go into with you, Suj. Thursday's quiz. Friday will be the differential show, game week 22 preview. If you want to support the show, Serge, it's www.patreon.com/Planet FPL. You should probably wait till Wednesday now.
Yeah, it's the end of the month, so sign up on the 1st because it will bill you today and it'll bill you again on Wednesday. But do come and support the show. It helps keep the lights on, keeps us in microphones and headphones and anything else we need. That's patreon.com/Planet FPL. There we go. That's a wrap. Stay safe. Look after yourselves. Ciao for now.
Thanks, everyone. Be nice to each other. Cue music, please, man, child.